We are officially in and starting this IG Live, which is co-star to guest star, the transition. Yeah, baby. And so this is not an uncommon conversation, but everybody here, bear in mind, Juliet's in the house. Juliet, what's up? Everybody bear in mind that I live my life by the 4 agreements, one of which is don't make assumptions. I don't assume or presume, and I don't want to do such in the way that co-star versus guest star. So let me spend a few minutes. Hey, Nabil, welcome in. Let me spend a few minutes and make sure that we are clear on the conversation about co-star versus guest star, just to begin with. First of all, that's called billing. That would be in film and television, the middle column on your resume, name of show, billing, director, and or also network. So that's the billing. Co-star smaller than guest star. However, in this conversation about 17, 18 years ago, it's not really in our contract, but the industry, in its infinite wisdom of jargon and negotiations, created what is commonly called now a one-day guest star, but it is still a guest star. Now, I'm going to get to that. This is a very, very full conversation, you guys. I'll get to that. But just understand, co-star, one-day guest, and then what we tend to call top-of-show guest star. And of course, there's guest star recurring, but that doesn't matter in this conversation. The issue becomes that the difference between the two, predominantly, is simply the amount of content that you have to perform. That's the difference between co-star and guest star. And all you have to do, see, what a lot of us today don't realize, but older school actors do, is that there's also a billing known as feature. Not with a D, not featured. That is a phrase that came out of background casting, that background companies tried to make more money by saying you'd get a featured background, which didn't pay you any more money. It just was closer to the camera. So nothing against that, but be clear, featured is not a billing when you are a principal who is speaking. Featured would be used if you were doing background, which in my personal professional opinion should not be on your IMDb and should not be on your resume. But there was at a time the billing, and it happens in certainly in contracts in feature films, that feature without the D is a billing. If that were in television, which is what co-star to guest star is for television, that would be because you're having a scene on a TV show, but none of the series regulars are in the scene with you. You're just a form of exposition or information, background information as characters speaking, paid principal scale, but you weren't with any stars. The whole place that co-star came from in television, based on the size of the role, is that you actually were in a scene with what is considered one of the series regulars. For example, Judy, if you were in a scene, this is my most simple example, you were sitting at a bar and the star of the show or one of the 4 or 5 stars of the shows sat down at the bar to order a drink and simply looked at you and said, "How are you doing tonight?" You said, "I'm great. How you doing, baby?" And that was your one line. That would probably be a 2-shot with you in there. Precious is in the house. And if that's all you had, Judy, in that show, that would commonly be billed as, negotiated as, and on your contract as a co-star. And your billing in the credits when the show runs would be end titles. This is really simple stuff that, by the way, no universities teach, and they should. But it helps you understand because this is about the business of this profession. But it's also about your upper climb in this profession. That's what this IG Live is about. It's the corporate ladder, only for an actor, co-star, one-day guest star, right? That's the whole point of this. So a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 line co-star, which renders differently in half hour, I'll cover that in a minute. I'm talking about our episodic drama right now. That's what a co-star would be. A guest star is when you simply have a great deal more content and your character is much more involved with the actual evolution of the story of that one episode. Now, there is no hard line, there is no black and white as to how many lines that is, how many days you work. No, that delineation of that we're going to pay you and bill you as a guest star just comes from the showrunners, comes from the production, comes from them. They're the ones on the breakdown who invent that. And they're the ones, and the reason why a one-day guest star was invented, it's all about money, you guys. That's all it's about. A lot of this stuff changed when we crossed shortly into the 21st century around the 2001, 2004 theatrical contractual negotiation, when all of a sudden with digital technology and where we had gotten to, that people realized in productions based on scheduling day out of days, which is what that's called, DOD, day out of days, your shooting schedule for 8 days, they realized that they could give somebody guest star billing, but they could shoot them in one day based on the show, based on the locations where they had to shoot. So this was once again a cheaper way to get someone to work for a one-day guest star, so it wasn't a top-of-show guest star that usually involves 3 or 4 or 5 of the 8-day shooting schedule, versus just what co-stars typically are, and typically they are just one day. Not always. Sometimes you may only have one line one day and one line another day with one of the stars, but they had to do it on 2 different days because of, again, location and geography. So I'm just giving you guys a little background, because if you do and keep doing co-stars, the challenge that we run into is how do we transition out of that and start going up? So co-stars will be a few lines with one of the stars. That's up to your agent to negotiate. That will be, you'll see your name very quickly at the end of end titles. A one-day guest star or a top-of-show guest star will be main titles. So the next time you watch a TV show, if you haven't already done this and you don't already know this, please just watch as the TV show starts. You'll see all the names of the series regulars, and right behind them, you will see the first name commonly on what's called a single card, which means it comes up by itself. That would be main titles, single card, first position. Means it's the first single card you see. Now, if there were 2 or 3 one-day guest stars, you'll keep seeing those credits come up with the other guest stars. And then the one-day guest stars are commonly on what's called a shared card. And sometimes you'll see, hey, Paul, you'll see 2 names on a shared card. You'll see 3 names on a shared card, usually not more than 3 names on a shared card in the main titles. But that's how you can clarify when you're watching the difference between the people who got hired as a co-star or maybe even a feature role, and those who got hired as a guest star. And when you look at the main titles, it's one of the ways you can tell the difference between somebody that had a top-of-show guest star, who has a single card, and one of the first names you see that isn't a series regular, and the people that have shared cards, which are probably some of the one-day guest stars. So what I'm sharing with you as an overall statement in the first 10 minutes, the first third of this IG Live today is, what we're always working to do is we're always working to eventually have top-of-show guest stars that may lead to some guest star recurrings and create some ability with enough work to have shots at being a series regular. That, of course, is the corporate stepladder, blah, blah, blah. Some people do it in one job, some people never do it, etc., right? But that's kind of the basis of the transition that is the entire title of today's IG Live. But, and there's a but, y'all, and it's a huge but. And Will, since you have my book, one of the things I've been talking about for 3 decades, mind you, is the thing I call areas of industry. And that's because not every area of industry functions the same. And when you discuss primetime television, there's a monster difference between episodic dramas, 1 hour, and half hour. How they define a co-star, how they define a guest star. You can't look at it necessarily by number of lines, because you can be a guest star on a half-hour show and have 7 lines, 1 scene. It just depends. Also, in this profession, from a business standpoint, just like in your life, when you get known for doing certain types of work, there's not only a transition of co-star to guest star, there's also the transition if you're not able to do it early on and do both comedy and drama in terms of being hired professionally anywhere in the world. Again, guys, this is not about LA. All the New York shows function the same way. The shows that are in Chicago function the same way. And I got news for you. UK, Paris, Sydney, Melbourne, they function the same way as well. They do. In that when you get known for doing a certain type of work, you don't tend usually in television to get back to doing the other. There are rare exceptions, but they're rare. This is why also I've always said this about daytime television. Almost no one, and that is true, over 70 years of daytime television, soap operas, almost no one has been an actual contractual series 2 or 3 or 4 year lead on a daytime show and ever made it out into primetime television or A-list feature films. I'm not going to go through the list, but I assure you out of the thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of actors that have been a part of daytime television, it almost never happens, okay? And it is rare that you will see somebody go from half-hour series regular to hour series regular or the reverse. It's not right or wrong. I'm just giving you a foundation to this idea of co-star transitioning to guest star, okay? So then you have to mix in type of distribution. I'm using these words on purpose. I'm not trying to confuse you. This is part of what our contracts are, you guys. Is it a cable show? Is it a broadcast network show? Is it a DigiNet show? Or is it a streaming show? None of this is bad. These are just different phrases. But understand this. No different than what you've seen in movies your whole life and what you've seen in your own life. I'll go to high school because I like to use high school a lot. So if you're in high school and you're the new kid in town, which I was because we moved a lot when I was a kid. If you're the new kid in town, and this wasn't me, but if you're a new kid in town and you show up, we could use Footloose as an example. Kevin Bacon, Footloose. Not about the religion part of it, about the being cool part of it. If you're a new kid at the school and you're 2-3 months in and all of a sudden you're going out with the gal who might be the homecoming queen, your status goes up within that environment, right? Fair enough. It's just life. It's called being a human being. So this is the same thing that happens here. Now, when you become extraordinarily successful in this profession, use Bob Odenkirk in Better Call Saul for an example. It doesn't matter whether that's a made for TNT, The Walking Dead, it doesn't matter. But when you're doing co-stars or guest stars, the difference of something being on Ion or Spike TV or TBS is different than doing a top-of-show guest star on the final episode of This Is Us, one of the most famous network television shows ever. Just as if you did a guest star on the final episode of Cheers or Friends back in the day as half hour, those kinds of things on your resume make it much easier to get auditions for something like Modern Family. So it's within each silo of area of industry where co-star and guest star come into play. Comedy versus drama, half hour versus hour. This is my point to actors that were like, well, I don't really want to think about all that. Okay, you don't have to think about it if you don't want. And if it just happens to you, okay, that's cool. But if you're not 17 years old and you're getting into your 20s and you don't have some credits, these are conversations that my point has always been, you have to talk to your representatives, you guys, if you want to make money at this profession from the standpoint of understanding the business. Because I'll be really honest with you, most agents and managers don't want to sit around even for 30 minutes. And again, I'm cutting this conversation 2 hours short. I could go 3 hours on this conversation. But they don't even want to spend the 30 minutes I'm spending to even get you to understand the part of what I'm discussing. So when you start, no matter what it is, I'm going to share with you that you want to if you start going out on co-stars, which is common, and you start booking some, to me, here becomes the magic number-ish. Yes, you can be going out for indie films, and you can be making your own stuff if you want, all those things. I am talking about co-star to guest star transition. Once you have done 9 or 10 co-stars, and maybe more like 5 or 7 in half hour, 9 or 10 in hour drama, this is when, to me, and I lived it, I did this. This isn't something I made up like a lot of these other people you see all over the internet talking about, I know the business is show business. Okay. Well, if they haven't sat in this chair, in their own chair of having done it, okay. I've done this, all right? This is when you have to start slapping your own hand, and it's not fun and it hurts, all right? But this is how you start to do this. Just like I use the high school prom queen analogy, is the same thing in television. When shows get to the end of their life, whatever that end of life is, the more the ratings go down, the better chance you have of getting on the boat, okay? Because in the first few years of a really successful show, whether that show was in 85, 95, 2005, or 2015, all the producers, the casting director, showrunners, network executives, blah, 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 they're doing everything they can to have that show become as successful as it possibly can right off the bat. Again, it's just about money, man. This is a business. It's business, okay? That means that a lot of names, a lot of offers, a lot of favors, a lot of friendships, that's what take up a lot of the casting that happens early on. But, and this is why you got to pay attention to this, and I'll use Grey's Anatomy as an example. But as the show's been on the air, which that show I think's been on the air for what? It's pretty, I don't think it's quite 20 years, but it's getting close. It's about, I think 2006 was its inception, so it's about 16 years. Okay, so they've gone through all the favors. They've gone through all the big offer-onlys to maybe a large 18, thanks Alana. They've gone through all that. So now, as the show's numbers are good enough for the network to want to renew the show, but not so high and hot that it doesn't make it possible, that's an example of when, if you had 10 co-stars, you'd be looking at a show like that and saying to your representative, hey man, I want to transition from co-star to guest star. So let's work to get me a one-day guest audition on Grey's Anatomy. Or Walking Dead. Shows Better Call Saul. It's at the end of its life. Breaking Bad. ER. It doesn't matter what decade you're in, man. Listen, you only have to learn what I'm saying to you today once. Why? Because this is how television works, man. It's just about songs, Billboard, who's number one, what's the hottest, it's simple shit. It's basic economics. It's supply and demand. So the more the demand goes down over the life of something, the better shot you have of being the supply to use that show to start your upward stepladder from co-star to guest star philosophically and business. But you have to be paying attention to this stuff, man. And then if you get a couple of one-day guests, you don't put one-day guests on your resume, you just put guest star. Of course, I always, when I'm top of show, which are most of my guest stars, I always put an asterisk next to it. At the bottom of my resume, there's an asterisk, just like a footer on any document that says top of show guest star. So they know that was top of show. So, or recurring, either one. 2 asterisks for a recurring, and more than one episode is considered recurring. Doesn't matter what it was, how big it was, doesn't make any difference, doesn't matter. So understand that the ratings of the show and the origination point for its distribution, whether it was Netflix, whether it was one of the tinier non-network networks, whether it was cable, or whether it was broadcast network, CBS, ABC, NBC, Fox. It doesn't matter. Now it could be Paramount, it could be Paramount Plus, be Disney Plus. It doesn't matter. But the creme de la creme is still network television, and then sporadically shows that kick butt on Netflix and kick butt on cable. It's just about ratings, man. So this is why when actors, for me, who are not stars and don't jump to being stars, are not engaged in a conversation with their representatives, once you start working about this strategy and or the representative isn't talking to you about it, why do you think I've had 46 representatives in my career? Hello? I didn't come here to think about working. I came here to work. Period. I was going to figure out some way to do such. And so here's part of the challenge. You have to make sure they're on the same page with what types of shows. That's why knowing what shows are on air matters. That's why knowing your master contact list matters. And who cast what 5 years ago and what they might be doing now. And the fact they might consider you for a one-day guest star now instead of a co-star. And that's the hard part. The hard part is getting your representative to get them to change the way they view you and your ability to do a larger role. That's the thing. Depends on their relationship, depends on yours. And yes, I mean, does it really depend on your resume? Not that much. Does it really depend on your IMDb star meter? No. I mean, if you've done 10 co-stars, your star meter is going to be what it is, okay? But this has to be a strategy. It has to be to get you out of that place and jump up to here. And you have to never forget that in television, you've got to split the diff between half hour versus hour. And I'm going to give you the example that I want you to understand right now. What's up, Matt? Here's the deal. I haven't auditioned for a co-star in hour drama television for so long, I don't even know how old I was the last time. That's not a statement of being a smartass. It's a statement of how long ago I got out of doing that. Now, at this age, not being a star and being this particular skin color, in today's world, does that limit the number of auditions that I have? Yes, absolutely it does. I don't audition very much. And that's what you have to face. And that's what a lot of actors don't like. They're like, yeah, but I don't audition as much anymore. I don't work. That's right. That's what the transition to co-star and guest star is about, especially in today's world. But when you work, it has more credibility. When you work, it leads more to the possibility of working visibly enough that network executives would consider you for fifth on a call sheet series regular for a new cable show. There's a point at going up to guest star. But yes, I mean, if I did co-star work right now, I'd probably work 40 weeks out of the year, but I'm not doing it. And you want to know why? Because once you go back, you never make it back. If you choose to accept co-star work, you'd have to get really lucky. I shouldn't say never. It would be 0.0001% of the time that maybe you would get fortunate enough to do a co-star that turned into a recurring on a show, and the recurring was on for long enough that it actually helped you get back into the guest star game. But once you cross over into the guest star gang level, it is hard if you choose to do co-star to go back. With this very important caveat, you guys, and here it is. And if you have any questions, get ready to type them in. I'm happy to take a question or two for sure. Here's the caveat. Hour versus half hour. That's the caveat. Because if I want to use one of the most successful half-hour shows in recent memory in television, it would be Modern Family. And the bottom line is, if I had a really fun scene with Miss Vergara or with Eric Stonestreet, Kevin E. would absolutely go do a co-star in half hour because that's not what fills my resume. And I would be doing one in a different area of industry that's at the top of its field. Cachet and clarity of type are the only thing that would alter this formula for me. Same as if somebody had done half hour their whole life, they might be willing to do a co-star on a drama show. At some point, you just don't want to do too many of them. And as you've already seen, and that's why I do this stuff in an order, you guys, go over to the YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed to me at YouTube, holy crap, please do. The Kevin E, also over on YouTube. But go over and watch the IG Live over there that I did about saying no. I just did it. That's why this is following this. Because you know what happens when you start getting into the place where you're going to do co-star to guest star transition? Guess what you have to do? You have to say no. It's one of the things you have to do. Because, guys, they have to fill shows. The casting community has a job to do. Shows have a job to do. They don't take it personally. That's why you shouldn't take it personally. It's not personal. They're just trying to get people. And if you become one of those co-star actors that people know is always going to walk in, always going to deliver, always going to do a good job, and you kick booty, why wouldn't they just keep calling you? Because if you were in their chair, you'd do the same thing. They only can start understanding that you're no longer available for that when you can show them on your resume that you've gone and booked a one-day guest star, even if it's on a lesser show, that you've gone and booked a top-of-show guest star, even if it's on a show on the way out at the door. That's how you begin to make the transition. If somebody has a question, please ask it now because we only got 4 minutes to go. I keep these to 30 minutes because I always want to be respectful of everybody's schedule. We got 4 minutes to go. So that's the back end part of billing. That's the definition of co-star, guest star. That's the definition of how billing looks in titles versus main titles, single cards versus shared cards, and with regards to areas of industry between half hour versus hour drama. And that's also, when you look at Netflix, it's also based on, the funny. Netflix can have a real transcendent effect on network television and cable television because they have such the ability on Netflix with a lot of those shows to have a lot of those shows as we used to do back in the day with theater and with plays. They have the ability to do shows that are serio-comical, way back similar to Fargo. When Fargo came out as a movie, I mean, it was dramatic in a lot of ways, but it was also funny. And so you have a lot of that, the Coen brothers do stuff like that. So just understand, hey, Nikki, we're almost done, only 3 minutes to go, but just know that we start typically about 9:05 and I go about to 9:35. But this will be on the grid. I keep my IG Lives on the grid for about 2 weeks, and then the edited version goes over to YouTube channel. But guys, there's a ton of stuff there. I'm even going to be adding a whole shitload more content on my YouTube this coming week and next week. So get over there. Any questions on the co-star to guest star transition? And for those who came in late, Matt and everybody else, hey, Nikki, just be sure, and when this goes on the grid, watch it from top to bottom. Because I really, this is my thing. I know there are 10, 15 other people out there that do some form of what you would call the business of show business education. But here's the thing, y'all, with absolute respect. I started doing this in 91. And while I did choose to close the physical doors of the Actors Network in June 30th, 2013, I simply just needed a break from doing this information. I've taken my break and I'm back. And the Actors Network won awards for a reason because I dig into the minutia of things that no one I've ever seen has in 3 decades. So make sure you go back, and Will, to your point about my book, this is one of those IG Lives you might want to watch over and over again. So when it comes off the grid, it goes over to YouTube. This is one of those you might want to revisit because it's a really good foundation. For me, the way you speak to your representative, I don't care if they're an agent or a manager, it doesn't make any difference. Understanding the foundation of billing, how co-star and guest star coexist, how that looks like on the main titles, and how you transition from it based on the distribution platform of a show, whether it's network, cable, streaming, and or a tiny what we call diginet or really sort of sub type of distribution platform, Spike TV, something like that, makes a difference. And how easy it is to go from co-star to start getting one-day guests and top-of-show guest or just normal guest star auditions to eventually add them to your resume. And yes, when you make that transition, just know ahead of time, Your auditions are likely to drop because there are certainly less of those roles than there are co-star. And they are harder to book for all of us. Doesn't matter what ethnicity, what age, anything, they're just more difficult to book. And you're also facing likely actors with a lot more experience and a much longer resume. Okay? That's going to wrap up co-star to guest star transition. Boom! You guys have a great, hope it's not a manic Monday, and we will see you on Wednesday, and we will see you on Friday. All right, guys. Peace and love. See you soon.